welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramos, and I'm pleased to say that today I have a guest who will be on for 2 programs. He has promised to do so, and that is former Prime Minister and, of course, the man who founded the Basdeo Panday Foundation, Mr. Basdeo Panday. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
Haven't had you on in a while, and that just means we've built up so much material to talk about that one program would never possibly cover.
As you wish.
You obviously are observing this nation's goings-on as they occur. Let's deal with something that was in the news recently, Section 34. I'm sure you have some thoughts about that.
Yes, I can only repeat what I said in the beginning. From the beginning, I've been saying that if the government wants to succeed in its plans to rid the courts of the burden of the number of cases that is strangling the judiciary, then a Section 34 is absolutely necessary. It has to get rid of all those cases that is frustrating the work of the judiciary. So when the act was passed, obviously everybody agreed with that, because without that, the government will not succeed in clearing the backlog, the judicial backlog. Therefore, I believe that the government will have to bring back a Section 34, either in its present or amended form, if they are going to succeed in removing the backlog from the judiciary and setting the judiciary free to move on. That has been my position. I believe the controversy began with the premature
the proclamation of the one clause.
Of that one clause. I think that's what caused the problem. But they'll have to bring back that clause.
Even though, I mean, obviously one of the main criticism was the fact that it may have singled out certain people for benefit. Yeah. I mean, and you as a lawyer, I'm sure, have views on that as well.
Sure. Well, I heard the lawyers used that in the case that they had, and the judge did not agree with them. But that is a legal matter that I suppose is going to be subject to appeal, and the courts are going to have to decide that. But as far as 34 itself is concerned, it is an absolutely necessary clause.
And of course, you're not the only expert to say that, because several other legal experts have said something equivalent will be necessary.
And when the matter became before the Parliament, by that time, I believe both the Chief Justice and the DPP had agreed that the clause was necessary.
Now, in terms of that particular item being singled out for criticism of the government, I know you have some other criticisms of the government, but that is clearly not one area that you don't necessarily disagree with them on.
34? No, yeah. No, I don't agree with them on having a 34. 34 is necessary.
So you have no problem with that? And
I have no problem with 34 because, as I say, 34 is necessary. If they want to clear the backlog, they have repealed 34, they'll have to bring it back. Otherwise, they'll continue having this backlog that strangles the courts.
But politically, it'll be a problem, won't it? Because, I mean, they had to repeal it. So to bring it back again will be an admission that they were either incorrect or correct, depending on which way you want to look at it.
Or both.
Or both at the same time. So it's politically, it's very difficult for them, isn't it?
Well, I don't know how it depends on how they handle it. I believe the population itself doesn't truly understand what Section 34 was intended to achieve. But as I say, the problem had been the early proclamation. Because everyone had agreed that had no proclamation been made by January of this year, it would have become law, because I believe that was the time limit set. Of course, that time limit was set, from what I've read, so that infrastructural arrangements would have been put in place to give effect to 34.
Now, that is, of course, one of the primary things that the opposition has been blaming the government for, although it is generally acknowledged that everybody signed on to that particular clause in that whole bill when it went through. But you have some other concerns about the government as well, I'm sure. I mean, and the most recent, of course, and it has been an ongoing thing, is Mr. Warner, who you, of course, have had your sort of difficulties with over the years. What is your take on the current business that we're seeing, and the Prime Minister's stance that until such time as she is satisfied there is some evidence of something, she is not going to take any action?
Well, I don't, I don't know who is in a better position to get that evidence. No one is, and the best person to get that evidence from, if the Americans are reluctant to give it, is Mr. Warner himself. I don't know why the Prime Minister doesn't ask Mr. Warner. Well, tell us what's going on here. First of all, I don't know why Mr. Warner don't tell the country what is going on. So I think they're digging their own grave, so to speak, when all they could have done was she could have asked Mr. Warner, but she refuses to ask Mr. Warner, or having asked him, she's not satisfied with the answers or do not want to tell the public what the answers are. That is all. And Mr. Warner himself, the fact that he keeps hemming and hawing and hedging and so on is increasing suspicion on him, not reducing it.
No, you were, of course, not just in the belly of the beast, you were the head of the beast at one point. So, in that sense, is there such a thing as a political animal or a part of a party that can be such a terrible weight, and yet there is apparently a reluctance to separate yourself from that weight, a dead weight, if you will?
Except the weight has something on you. And you know Mr. Warner himself, during the campaign when he was campaigning against Kamala, actually said he had a file. And in fact, at one executive meeting of the party, he actually brought a file and threw it on the desk and saying he had all these things in this file on her. What he had, I don't know, whether it was just old newspapers or so, I'm not sure. But the fact is that what is taking place leads one to believe that he does in fact have something on her. That is what the public is led to believe. I don't know. I don't know what he has, and I don't know if he has anything at all.
I mean, is the fact that he was re-elected chairman a particularly strong suit that he has to play?
Mr. Warner has a way of arranging for the election results.
No further comment.
Of course not. Would you want to get charged for libel or something?
But I know you have good court clothes. You mentioned the fact that he, during the campaign, said he had files. Clearly, I mean, you are somebody who had no reluctance in saying you, in many ways, find there are political lessons to be learned from the prince. Machiavelli's a prince. If someone has files on you, is it not incumbent upon you to get files on them to sort of equal them and therefore have your own little trump card? And would there be not much of a problem at this stage getting files in the other direction?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if the person upon whom he has files have made any attempt to get files, or maybe they do. And maybe they are confronting each other instead of with swords and pistols with files. I don't know.
It would be a very modern version of the old fight, wouldn't it?
It would be.
I mean, as you look at the progression of things from the beginning of this administration with Mr. Warner, obviously he had a certain portfolio. That portfolio, there was some sort of division, and his portfolio was split. Then he became sort of, for us casual observers, slightly the doghouse, if you looked at the seating arrangements and things like that. And then all of a sudden he's back in again. And not just back in again, but back in as Minister of National Security. How do you read that as an observer, knowing the parties involved?
He must have added new items to the file.
Do you think he's well suited for that ministry, or any ministry for that matter?
I think Mr. Warner carries a heavy load, a heavy baggage, if I may put it that way, instead of a load. And I think he ought to clear the air. Mr. Warner himself ought to clear the air. If he doesn't, it will continue, and it will continue to bring the government into disrepute, not only nationally, but internationally. So I think he has a duty to clear the air.
There's a parliamentary sort of tradition around the world where when there is if you will, a cloud hanging over the head of anyone in an administration, the person usually, and we've even seen it in the previous administration, will step down pending investigations.
Yes.
That's not a particularly strong tradition in this country, it doesn't seem.
That is why I was saying there is a need for constitutional reform in Trinidad, which I hope we'll talk about later.
We're going to spend a whole program talking about that, okay. I should mention.
And the point is, this the system we've inherited of cabinet-type government, where the executive and the legislature is one. In fact, the executive controls the legislature under the cabinet system. And the same obtains here. But it is unsuited to us here because we do not have the ethos and the mores of the English from whom we inherited this system. And you've mentioned it. The moment there's an allegation against a minister, he resigns. And there are many cases where ministers have resigned even when there was an allegation, and when those allegations were proven to be untrue, they have returned in higher positions in the government. So I think if we follow the British tradition, that is what ought to have been done. But we don't follow the British tradition here. That's why there's so much need for constitutional reform that separates the executive from the legislature.
Now, of course, well, you were well known to be very fearless when it came to being leader of your party and leader of the government. You must at certain times, I mean, you're obviously very different people, you and Kamala Persad-Bissessar, but you must look and think to yourself, what would I do in that circumstance? What would you have done if Mr. Warner or anybody hypothetically in that same position?
I'll tell you what I did. I fired the minister. People forget Dan Raj Singh. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's what I did. When allegations were made against him, I referred the matter to the police and fired him.
But Mrs. Persad-Bissessar has also done similar things with Mary King, for example, and Mr. Partap.
And that I think is what adds to the rumor, belief, suspicion that whether she could have done that with Partap and she could have done that with her, but she can't seem to do it with Mr. Warner. Those files must be fat by now.
No, of course, it does lead to the conclusion, I guess, on the part of some members of the public that there is a certain untouchable element, which, I mean, it must be probably a bit of a problem in the government if you have someone who's viewed as untouchable.
But why is one untouchable at all? Unless someone has something on you. Otherwise, why is someone untouchable? Why should Mr. Warner be untouchable? Why can't the Prime Minister remove him from his office in the morning? Except she fears something. I don't know the reason.
No, as you look at this administration, and you obviously have some vested interest in observing how they perform, because they are, of course, representing at least partially in terms of the partnership, the party that you founded, of course.
Which is now dead, incidentally.
So you regard the UNC as you know it as dead?
Yeah. All the things we believed in. A party, the soul of a party is what it stood for. That's the soul of the party. And the UNC, as it is now constituted and it is now operating, doesn't stand for any of the things the UNC stood for. The UNC, which took us, 20-something years to build.
And I know it's a bittersweet thing for you, because over the years with our interviews together, you've mentioned the fact that you have very, very, and I'm being polite, mixed feelings about the Prime Minister constantly referencing you and saying, thanks to our founder, Basdeo Panday, and let's all have a round of applause for Basdeo Panday.
That is what it is intended for, the round of applause. It's only PR.
Or do you think it's PR trying to sort of bring that element that supports Basdeo Panday and what you stood for and carry that support forward?
It's an attempt to deceive, because if you look at what is happening in the party, you'll see that nothing stands for nothing. They continue. We stood up against the use of agricultural land for housing. They are doing that with a vengeance, so that's gone. We stood up for open government. We criticized the PNM for excluding from the effects of the Freedom of Information Act certain bodies. They have not reintroduced them. They are more secretive than the government they criticized. They adopt the same arguments if they are accused of corruption. They say, bring the evidence. That's exactly what the PNM used to do. When they control the government and they control the machinery to get the evidence, they go to the taxi driver and the farmer and they say, well, bring the evidence, you bring the evidence. They are no different from the PNM.
So do you view the People's Partnership as a coalition government or a new political formation that is itself a party?
I think it is neither fish nor fowl nor good red herring. It's just there for power. It's a group of people, a collection of people who only wish to hold on to power as long as they can. I don't think they stand for anything.
Well, it's interesting because many of the diehard UNC members from the UNC as you know it have carried through to this government. Are you saying that in fact they've just abandoned all principles and have got bought into a new version of a party that still maintains the name the UNC?
First, two things I think one can. What they have done is they have involved the government in an enormous amount of patronage. So there are several layers in the UNC at the moment. There are those who have been the recipient of patronage. Of course, they won't criticize the government. There's another layer that have their hands out like that, waiting for their share of patronage. Again, there's a lower level, the lowest level, where the people are enormously dissatisfied and disenchanted with the way that they are being treated. That's how I see it.
Now, there's been a new expression that's been born over the last couple of years, in particular with reference to the COP, which of course you had other names for and how you pronounce the acronym, but it's the eat a food concept. What do you make of that? Is there some reality to that in your view?
Oh, I believe that the COP wants to be part of the government and not part of it at the same time, and they can't do that. If the government falls, the COP is going to fall with the government, because they are going to be part of the corruption and the waste and the mismanagement and the brutality that they inflict on people and all. The COP is going to be part of that. The MSJ recognized that, and they extricated themselves so that they wouldn't be tainted when as people predict, the UNC or the coalition will fall. When the coalition falls, everything with the coalition is going to fall. And I don't think that the COP has found out the answer of how to extricate themselves from that difficulty.
What was interesting was when the MSJ and Mr. Abdullah pulled out, the reaction from, well, Mr. Warner comes to mind immediately, which was, well, that's of no consequence. And yet they were seen of such consequence when they went into the election.
Exactly. That's a case of using people. That's not surprising with the gentleman. You use people when you need them and discard them when you don't. After all, yesterday was yesterday and today is today.
And politics has its morality of its own, I guess.
Politics has its morality of its own.
Do you suppose one of the problems with, as you mentioned, the role of the COP within the coalition is the fact that initially, I think, as anyone will acknowledge, the COP was not the UNC party. It was not the Basdeo Panday UNC party,
sure,
with Mr. Dukran leading the helm.
Of course.
Mr. Dukran, of course, has stepped away from that role. Do you think that suddenly, that removal of that anchor has caused the party to drift into something that perhaps it doesn't really know what it is at this point? I
read some of the blogs and so on, and I see that the COP members themselves are complaining that the COP has lost its way, and that the COP is no longer the party that spoke of a new politics. They don't talk about any new politics and so on again. And one doesn't know what the COP stands for now. And the only thing it seems to me that they stand for is how not to lose office. And they are so afraid of losing office, that is those who, the leadership level, who are so afraid of losing office that they will sacrifice any principles that they have had in order to hold on to office.
And in fact, they were perhaps more critical of the government occasionally on an executive level before their recent executive election.
Yes.
When you had a different leadership there who were apparently not afraid to speak out very publicly against the actions of the UNC, if the UNC, I will use it in terms of your description, part of the coalition. Do you think that has weakened them even more, the fact that they aren't being outspoken on an executive level? Sure.
And they seem to stand up for nothing now. All sorts of things are going on. And I must say the new chairman has, in fact, on occasion made some statements. Otherwise than that, they accept all the corruption, they accept all the waste, they accept all the mismanagement. Look what they're doing to the former sugar workers. Do you know that a sugar worker who rented land from Caroni in Barrackpore has got to go to El Socorro to pay rent? They treat the people with such contempt. They have set up the EMBD. They have set up the Caroni. So Caroni looks after the tenants, but not to collect the rent. They have set up the EMBD to provide infrastructure, but the landlord can't provide the infrastructure. There are people who got lands, who actually built their houses. They got lots. They built houses. I know a man who came to me recently. He built a house for almost $1 million. He can't get water, and he can't get electricity, and he doesn't know who to turn to. He comes to me, and I ring around and so on, and nobody seems to be able to tell me, this man paid $25,000 for infrastructure, and there's nobody to whom to turn to provide the infrastructure for which he paid. That is the kind of brutality that I'm talking about of the present government. Of course, they're continuing what the PNM did. I agree with that. But the COP is bound to suffer the effects of that kind of brutality on the people. They can't escape. They were part of it. They know what's going on.
Now, part of government, I suppose everybody will guess, is it will inevitably involve taking some criticism of your actions. This government has obviously had a few, as they refer to them, missteps over the last while, but recently it seems...
You're being very kind.
I'm using the lingo of the government, but recently it seems has become almost hyper-fearful of criticism or very reactive to any criticism. And you were one of the early ones to fall into that problem, I guess, because people started describing you as irrelevant within the party. In private meetings, then all of a sudden it became obvious who is Basdeo Panday. But now, of course, the media has come under scrutiny as well.
I learned my lesson early, and it was really a struggle that I had, not with the media, but with a certain so-called media mogul who said that the press, media, had an untrammeled right to publish. And I disagreed with that. I said, no, the press does not have an untrammeled right to publish lies, half-truths, and innuendos. I haven't changed. I believe that. And there was some conference I remember that came to Trinidad, Chapultepec, I think is what they called it. And I was asked whether I would subscribe to their memoranda or something. And I said, not until you include in that document that you do not have a right to publish lies, half-truths, and innuendos. They refused, and so did I. And that was the fight. I still hold to that. The media is under no obligation to support the government. It has only one obligation, and that obligation is to publish the truth. So that media houses are in business to make money. If they don't make money, their businesses will close down. In order to make money, you publish what you believe the public wants to hear. You don't publish things that they won't read or they won't listen to. And you are entitled to do that. The media is entitled to do that, so long as what it publishes are not lies, half-truths, or innuendos. That's the way I see it.
And there shouldn't, I suppose, to some extent, there's also, there must be an acknowledgement of the fact that there is more than one truth sometimes, because truth can appear differently from an ideological perspective.
Exactly.
And certainly in Britain, where you're very familiar with, having gone to school there and spent much time there, most of the newspapers have an ideological bend and will report a story rather differently depending on what side they come on.
Certainly.
In the US, Fox News is famous for being conservative.
So long as they publish what is true. They're entitled to have views. They're entitled to determine which items they will publish and which they won't. They're entitled to that. That is why I can't understand the position of the present government. They believe that the government has a duty to be fair. What is being fair? Where is it written that the media must be fair? I thought the media had to be truthful. So long as it doesn't owe the government a duty to publish, to balance. Look at every newspaper and say, so many columns for the government and so many columns against the government. That is not their duty. They don't have to do that. In any case, the government has vast media resources. They have, I don't know how many TV stations and how many radio stations and so on.
Well, at least 2 TV stations, and I lost count of radio stations, yeah.
Why don't they use that? What is the policy? What is the purpose of that media owned by the government? I thought they would have used it to change the culture of our people. I thought they would have used it to show pictures of Singapore, how Singapore is clean and so on. I thought they would use it to show how drivers drive badly on the road, how people litter All of this is what the state media should be used for, to change the culture of our people. But no, instead what they want? They want you to publish a day in the life of
whichever government minister comes to mind. I'm sure a few come to your mind right now.
A day in the life of this minister, and a day in the life of that minister, and a day in the life of the other minister. That's absolute.
But the interesting thing is the government actually largely does get that in the media in Trinidad and Tobago. Most countries would be happy to have every single press conference being reported, which we tend to do as a media because of its sort of shorter news. So to some extent they do get that already, don't they?
Yes. But when they speak of being fair, they mean that you must not publish anything critical, even though it's true. That's the real problem.
Well, Mr. Panday, we're out of time for this part one, but in part two we're going to continue talking, but next time about constitutional reform, because you have some very strong views based on your past, your experience, and your vision for Trinidad and Tobago.
Sure.
So I look forward to that. Mr. Panday, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.